Then the idea was to quantify, relations in the company and what when people made you happy or anxious, and how were people getting around. And as I was at McKinsey, I was also specializing in organizational development and people. This is fascinating, like really finding a way to quantify like soft skills and relationships that will allow the skepticals to, embrace that people matter. I think it's a very interesting.
On today's episode, we are featuring Ingrid Toppelberg, who is the Chief Product Officer at Cybint Solutions, a global cybersecurity education company based in Tel Aviv. Originally from Argentina, Ingrid began her career in private equity and then moved to management consulting at McKinsey, where she worked across a wide range of industries, including retail, banking, and telecommunications. Ingrid did her MBA at MIT Sloan and is also the head coach at MIT Entrepreneurship and Innovation Bootcamp, where she contributes to the development of a global network of entrepreneurs. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the exciting journey of Ingrid Toppelberg. Hi Ingrid, how are you?
Hi, Alok. I'm good. Thanks. Very excited to be here.
I'm glad to have you here. So you're based in Tel Aviv, right?
Yes.
Yes, I have lots of friends in Israel, and so I want to visit there. Of course, due to COVID and everything, I have not been able to do so, but it's up there on my list. So it's great that you are there, and perhaps you could give me some tips for what to check out when I visit there.
Definitely.
Uh, awesome, great. So, Ingrid, what's your story?
What's my story? I like to say it's a pretty random one, actually. So I'm originally from Argentina. I studied economics in Argentina, and then I worked in private equity and venture capital. Then I moved to McKinsey. I did management consulting there for about 5 years. I took a year off. I danced tango 8 hours per day, 6 days a week. It was a
Nice.
very amazing experience. Then I did my MBA at MIT. I came back to McKinsey. I worked there 2 more years. And then I decided to move to Singapore. Not really sure why, to be honest. I was very attracted by the story of like the growth of that country. Like at the same time, Argentina kind of went background. So I was very inspired. I went there. I spent a few months there. Didn't really find what I was looking for. Moved to Silicon Valley, to San Francisco. Worked for a small startup that I had been working with remotely for a while. And then I realized that I had no idea what I wanted to do in my life or where I was going. I was doing everything randomly and wrong. So flew to Brazil, did a spiritual retreat in the middle of nowhere, spent several days in nature on my own. And then I decided that I would move back to the US and do in my head, it was like when I grow up, I want to be doing independent consulting as I was doing at McKinsey, but on my own. And so suddenly it was like, so why when I grow up? Why when I retire and not now? If this is really what I want to do. So I moved back to the US, started my own consulting firm, and started doing a lot of different things. I worked for big pharma, did a lot of change management and digitalization consulting, and ended up working a lot in education and technology. Spent a lot of time, for example, in Saudi Arabia, working with women to help them get into the workforce. Work with, as I mentioned, big pharma, helping them adopt new technologies. Started working with MIT bootcamps, teaching entrepreneurship around the world in a lot of very different places, very exciting. And eventually, 2 years ago, I decided to move to Israel. So I moved to Tel Aviv, and I started working at Cybint, which is a cyber education company. Here now I'm the Chief Product Officer, and I'm helping the world stay safe from cyber threats.
That's great. And
Yeah.
I think that's a very fascinating journey that you just mentioned because, starting from Argentina and then, Singapore, US, and then now in Israel, I think that's that's wonderful. I think, people who sort of dabble into these different cultures have much better awareness of how things work and cultural sensitivity and how to bring together ideas and people, and I really admire when I see that in people. And so yeah, I'm excited to dive deep into some of those things. So building on that, my first question to you is, the startup ecosystem in Tel Aviv has created some of the most impactful organizations in recent history. So, Waze is a good example. What do you think makes it stand out from Silicon Valley? Because you also spent some time there.
Yeah, I was in Silicon Valley and I also was in Boston, right? That's another huge startup environment. Look, I don't know if you can say that there's one thing that makes the difference, but what I can tell you is like I was super impressed with the culture here. So like the lean startup methodology that, it's kind of a book in the US. Here it's a lifestyle. This is how we operate. This is a very young country that grew from nothing, and you had to figure it out as you could, as you went. And this is really the way things work here. And sometimes it can be quite annoying, to be honest, because it means that there's bureaucracy. It's not very clear. As an immigrant here, it's like, okay, how do I do this? And there's no straight path. But it also means that you're figuring out as you go. And in business, in the startup world, this skill that here we call chutzpah too, it's very helpful. And also there's no afraid to change, and to there's no fear to change and to adapt. So you do something, you debrief it like very objectively, not like there's no fear of feedback. There's no emotional charge in feedback. It's just like, what did we do? ABC, what happened? These things happen. What could have we done differently? And you just change, and then you do something else. And as you know, I've been in other cultures also, and when I interact with other cultures, I find this is hard to understand. It's like, oh, what do you mean? We need to go through all this process of thinking before we do anything, and we don't. We just do something and reflect on it, which is a very different approach again to business, but also to life.
Yeah, yeah. And I can understand that. I think, I sort of had this bit of a cultural shock when I started my company here in New York, because the way things work here, be it from hiring or fundraising or, project planning and execution, is very different from, how it's done in India. So I'm, of course, originally from India. But even within India, I've only worked with US based organizations. So my first job was in investment banking with JP Morgan. So I was aware of like how things work, but it's one thing to be aware of how things work and work within one function, and then doing the entire thing by yourself. So I can relate with that, and especially the way uh, you go about hiring people makes, I think, a lot of difference, in the sense that they have certain expectations when they look at a company. In India, that's very different in compared to the US. And so I had to unlearn a lot of things and then learn a lot of new things for me to keep things running. So I relate with that. But the idea of chutzpah, I think, that's really great. I think this mentality of like, okay, let's figure it out. That goes a long way, as you said, in the world of entrepreneurship. Like, adaptability is everything. So yeah, that's pretty cool. And although there is bureaucracy, it's great to see that you've been able to cut through that and manage things on your own. So that's pretty cool.
As I mentioned, it's not my first immigration really. So I've been, I mean, I've been working on how to land in a new country. To be honest, here because the language, I don't speak the language. It has been a little more challenging, but I'm working on that every day.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I also, of course, don't speak Hebrew or Yiddish. I mean, whatever goes. I mean, people speak both of them, but I watch a lot of Israeli TV shows, so I get like few words here and there. Uh, so yeah, I my friends keep recommending me this, like, hey, you should watch this show, and so I get to learn a lot about culture that way. But yeah, language certainly is a big barrier. But have you? I'm just curious. Have you been able to find anyone from Argentina or Latin America in general in Israel, or not so much?
Yeah, there's a huge Jewish community in Israel, in Argentina, and there's a huge Argentinian community here. Personally, I have not been that much in touch with Argentinians here, but right now I have two Argentinian interns in the company, which I'm very excited about. So and
Yeah.
culturally, Israelis and Latin people, we are very similar. So we really match.
Right. Yeah. That's awesome. Great. Yeah. So at least with the interns, you can speak in Spanish, right? I think Spanish is the
Yeah, yeah,
one.
yeah.
This one. Yeah. Okay. So I think it's only the Brazil that speaks Portuguese, right?
Yeah, we have someone from Brazil too in the company, and I guess this is also part of what makes Israel so special. We have people from all around, in a very small place, and we
Right.
have tons of different languages.
Have you met any Indians or seen?
There are Indians, yes. I have not met them, to be honest, in Tel Aviv, but I know they are out there, and I will eventually.
Oh, okay. That's great. All right. Okay. So now you alluded to being part of MIT Bootcamp, and so you are a head coach at MIT Bootcamp. So what does that entail? What does being a head coach mean in the context of MIT Bootcamps?
Yeah, so the MIT Entrepreneurship and Innovation Bootcamp, it's a very intense leadership experience, entrepreneurship experience. It used to be a 1 week intensive experience. Now it's a 10-week online experience. Um, and so during this time, you get assigned, like people from all over the world come to join the MIT bootcamps. You get assigned to a team, usually of 5 people. Your teammates are very diverse group from all around the world, different seniorities, different backgrounds, different experience, different countries. And in these 6 days or 10 weeks, you get to build a business with your teammates. The first thing is to really find a problem that hurts, a problem that's really hurting someone, that they will be willing to pay or spend time solving it. This is a very different approach. We don't base ourselves on finding cool solutions, but on finding like real problems. And all this process is coached by experienced entrepreneurs. So we bring experienced entrepreneurs from the MIT community that coach the teams throughout the program. Now, because these are experienced, busy entrepreneurs, they're not always the same. So they change, and we bring different, like in a healthcare bootcamp, we bring people with healthcare experience and technology with technology experience. So as we grew, we realized that we needed have to ensure that every team would get the same amazing coaching experience. So I developed the coaching manual, I developed all the processes and all the qualities that we look for in a coach. And during the programs, I manage the coaches. We get together, we exchange, we problem solve together. When there's something that they cannot handle on their own, I help them, or I interact directly with the teams. And so it has been a really amazing experience, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, as an entrepreneur myself, I feel that there is this sort of this energy when you're trying to come up with a new solution or working on a new problem. It's just like, I think human brains are just conditioned to have that excitement when we work on something new, and especially if it is sort of this process where it is done through a certain level of coaching, and then you have people from different backgrounds. It makes it that much more exciting because you have diverse points of view, and then you are part of this intensive experience. And so I think that's great. So how does one become part of MIT Bootcamp? Is there a selection process? Is there an application that
Yes.
one has to go through?
Yeah, it's an open enrollment program, so anyone in the world can apply. And there's a selection process. You have to there's a video interview process at the beginning in your application process, and then you'll get an answer and you'll get to join. As I mentioned, it's so diverse. Like in the last boot camp, we had people from 42 different countries. This is
Wow.
this is so unique, and it's very rare. Like I had it like when studying at MIT, I had the opportunity to be in these international environments, but not everybody gets to have that experience. So the MIT bootcamp, and then once you graduate, you belong to the alumni community, and so all these people that are super motivated leaders around the world that want to make a change, they now join this community with other super motivated leaders that want to make a change, and so it's a very inspiring community.
Yeah, yeah. And I had a brief interaction with the MIT community because at some point I was also looking to apply for the MBA program at MIT. And so I went for a campus visit and I sat in a class, like you can sit in a class, right? And you can observe the class of like how professor teaches and how the interaction works. And what I was surprised to find is that, I think the class that I took was human resources, and it was because MIT is a technology school, they sort of quantify everything mathematically or like along those principles. So I was surprised to find that they had a formula for quantifying the productivity and like the monetary value of, each individual in the workforce, and how companies actually run those simulations before putting out job postings in terms of like what kind of mix they want for this team that they're looking to hire. And that was pretty interesting to me because up until that point I had not thought of like quantifying human behavior in terms of like a certain dollar value or on a certain trajectory as such.
We're pretty proud nerds. So yeah, we're very friends of numbers and there's drive to analyze and get data everywhere. When I was there in the MBA, also I did a project with Sandy Pentland in the media lab, and he had these sociometric badges, and he wanted to measure like all our physical reactions to meeting you or meeting a different person. And so then the idea was to quantify relations in the company, and what people's made you when people made you happy or anxious, and how are people getting around. And as I was at McKinsey, I was also specializing in organizational development and people. This is fascinating, like really finding a way to quantify like soft skills and relationships that will allow the skepticals to embrace that people matter. I think it's a very interesting endeavor. And Sandy Spedland continued, and he has done great things. So, yeah, we keep quantifying, definitely.
Yeah, that's very exciting to me. Yeah, it's well, I don't come from an engineering background, and I was not good at math. I am now, but back then I wasn't. So it's no wonder that I couldn't get into MIT. But yeah, someday I hope that maybe for an executive MBA or some other program, like I can be part of that community and be involved in and engaged in those conversations.
Well, you should join the MIT bootcamp.
Yeah, maybe that could be a good way to get a taste for what it means to be at MIT. So yeah, I might take your advice and go ahead with that. uh, right, okay, so now you cleared level 1 and level 2 of the CFA program back in 2005. CFA was not a coveted finance certification back in the day. So what prompted you to pursue that program? Was it like something that your peers were doing, or was it something that was mandated by the organization or anything as such?
No, I honestly don't remember exactly what prompted. I'm going to guess my dad, probably. I was taking a sabbatical. So after I graduated from undergrad and before I started in the venture capital fund, I took a sabbatical, and my definition of sabbatical is sitting for the CFA exam. I also took cooking classes and other things, but this is what I did. And I think it was because my dad retired. He used to work in private equity also, and he retired like a long time ago, and he lives from managing his money in the stock market. And I love the idea of having that freedom at some point in my life to be able to say, okay, I don't need to work every day in a certain place. I can, be independent and do whatever I want. So this seemed like a good idea. And I guess back then also I had a very, very, very severe imposter syndrome. I and I would try to collect as many badges as I could that would make me feel like I'm good enough. So, I did the CFA, I worked at McKinsey, I entered MIT, and that didn't help with imposter syndrome, to be honest. I had to work on it on other ways. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I can understand because I too have gone through that process of CFA training. And I also have cleared level 1 and level 2. I'm just not able to find time for level 3. So it's that. But for me, I think in my experience, it was something that was just required because right out of college I got into a company like JP Morgan, that and a lot of things I picked up over there. So level 1 was easy for me because it was just like implementing what I was doing in work. But level 2 was sort of like, okay, if I have to run a full blown analysis for a small company, then what are the factors that I need to know. And so I don't think that I have heard like so much discussion about CFA until like, let's say, 2010 onwards. So that's why it kind of stood out to me that okay, you did it back in 2005, because at that point I didn't even know something like CFA certification existed. But yeah, so I think it's great that you were able to go through that. But I think you mentioned a very important point about imposter syndrome, right? It's for some people it could be like a force for good, where it could push them to new heights, and then it could turn around their life. But for some people it could be a huge source of anxiety, and it could hold them back because they could be so overwhelmed by piling on all this responsibilities and all these deadlines and pressures of achieving something, that it could, well, derail them or like make them feel frustrated or depressed. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's a tricky thing.
It's a, it's difficult. And honestly, like when I was in Boston, I kept having these conversations with my friends, and particularly my girlfriends, and it was like constantly like, oh my god, I'm the worst. And she would tell me, no, no, no. And then she would say it, and I was like, no, you can't, how can you say that? And it was this I kept having this conversation over and over. And so at some point it was like, why is it so difficult for us to see how amazing we are? Well, it's so easy to see how everybody else is so amazing. So I actually got together with one of my friends, and we developed this imposter syndrome workshop that we delivered at MIT. Like, because at MIT we're all imposters, definitely 100%. And we did a 4-day, then we did a 3-day, and it was very exciting and very helpful, and it was also nice to see that kind of MIT embraces it, in the sense that, like, yeah, we do have an issue, we need to address this, and to work on it. So it's definitely an open, and I can say I feel a lot better now. I did a lot of my own spiritual work, and I think I'm not there anymore, and sometimes it still comes up. So it's a process.
Yeah. Yeah. So what were some of the things like, what helped you overcome, like if you had to say a couple of things? So of course, having a peer support helps because then you can just discuss and express your feelings, and that makes it easier to understand or have that perspective. But you mentioned spirituality, and so like meditation or having some sort of outlet or some sort of thing that you believe in also makes a difference. But I think I sort of never had to grapple with it, in the sense that I always sort of felt that if I am looking to achieve something, then I'll get there as long as I'm sincere about it. And so only recently I've kind of begun having these conversations with people who are, in this high stress environment, where they talk about like, oh, one of the reasons why I have this job or I want to do this job is to prove to the world or family or society that I'm strong or I'm capable of doing certain things. But given the option, they would not do that. Like they might become a painter, or like go on a road trip or something. So it's just that they're so bogged down by these expectations of like living up to a certain image, that they sometimes end up feeling they're just not good enough. And so yeah, I think it's great that you took that initiative, and you experienced an issue, found a solution, and then shared it with a larger community. And I think that's great, because a lot of people go through it, and so to have someone who speaks about it and helps you cope with that, I think makes a lot of difference.
No, it's been a journey, and as you said, like meditation has been essential, and positive affirmations and being grateful and having a growth mindset, and definitely having a supportive community that can call you on those things that you do have been really, really key to feeling
Yeah,
better.
that's great. Awesome. Right. Okay. So now you have the rare distinction of having spent time in finance as well as management consulting, something that MBA students all over the world dream of, either being in it or like, switching between these two industries. So, what would your advice be to people who are looking to get into one of these industries?
Uh, I always say that I think everybody should go through a management consulting experience at some point in their lives. I also always say that I've learned more at McKinsey in a week than 2 years at MIT. And this is because
Yeah.
when you need to put into practice what you're learning, like you just learn it faster, right? So if I would go from a project like working on strategy in telecom, and after a weekend suddenly I was working in risk in oil or in pricing in banking, it was like, okay, you have 3 days, go figure it out, and you just learn it, which is very different than like taking a course on a topic that who knows when you're going to use or not use. So I think that's why also I'm so passionate about what I'm doing now, that I'm helping, like doing intensive learning experience that can help reskill people and focus on skills that they will need for real life, and not like the traditional academic education that's not that practical. So what I would suggest people to want to enter to these industries, I would say go. It's not easy to get in, but go, it's worth it. However, ask yourself every day, is this where I need to be? Because it's very easy to enter into the rat race, and you're so busy and so stressed that you are not really reflecting the trade-offs and the cost of being there. So I think it's very important that you keep asking yourself, like, is this where I need to be today? Is this where I need to be today? And the moment when that trade-off doesn't make sense anymore, you need to get out, and you need to have the courage to get out. Sometimes it's hard because it's costly, it's comfortable, it's prestigious. So it's
Yeah.
difficult to get out.
Yeah. It's almost like getting stuck on a hamster wheel, where it's just like once you are in it, then a lot of other things come with it, like as you said, prestige, and the money and all of those things. And so sometimes that could make it very difficult for people to leave. But I have a friend who works in management consulting, and she says management consulting is like problem solving on steroids while living outside, like living out of a suitcase. So it's like you're constantly flying from one place to another, and you are just like going from one crazy problem to another. And yeah, so it's, and she also works at McKinsey, so I sort of have this first hand understanding of what it means to be in management consulting. Of course, I have not experienced it myself, But I understand the pressures in the sense that I worked with JP Morgan only for a year, because as you said that after a year that trade off didn't make sense, because it I had to work night shifts. I mean, everybody had to work night shifts because it was an office based in Mumbai, and predominantly we had, projects for New York bankers, right? So we would like do research for them, and like all the pitch books and all the material that they need to broker a deal for JP Morgan was provided by the team that I was part of. So of course, that was not the only shift option, but like at some point everybody had to go through that because you are supporting the New York bankers. London bankers was different, Hong Kong was different, Australia, all of that was different. But yeah, so then it got to a point where, like, staying up all night and working in this intensive deadline oriented environment didn't make sense because my health began suffering. So yeah, like, I know people who stuck around for another couple of years, but I knew that, okay, this thing for me has, like, reached its peak, like I cannot continue anymore. So I moved out. But yeah, I it didn't, like, make me feel bitter about finance. Like, I still have that love for finance. I still do it for my company, I did it for other companies. But yeah, it's true, like, what I learned in 3 years of my undergrad was only useful for a week, and then it's like, okay, there's this whole new thing that you need to learn, be it like research or software or team management. It's just like, well, okay, you spent 3 years learning something that is useful only for a week in real life. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's intensive process. And yeah, you had great advice for people. So yeah, make sure that, that trade-off makes sense, because what's the point of making all that money if you don't have enough time to spend it, right? So that was another thing for me, that okay, at some point you need to put on those brakes.
Yeah, and depression is also very high. Personally, I was very depressed also the last few years I was there, and I had to take time off. And it's something we don't talk about, but it's something that we talk about it more now, but still not enough. I think it can have a very big toll on your life, in your health.
Yeah, yeah. But now a lot of companies are under fire because, all these stories are now coming out of like how crazy long working hours are there at these companies. And so yeah, like, not only it's difficult to get into these industries, but it's also like, it spooks the people that are already sort of, in two minds about whether to go in it or not. So it's that. So yeah, I want to. And this is something we already have discussed a little bit, but you got your MBA from MIT, and of course, as I said, MIT is known to be quant heavy. So what was your specialization first, and then were there any subjects where were surprised to have, like, a quant perspective? Like, you spoke about relationships, like, how a professor was doing that at MIT Media Lab, but were there any other courses where you felt like, oh, I didn't know that this could be quantified, or you could have a numerical approach to this? I'm just curious to know if that is something that happened.
So I was not necessarily surprised. You can take all the heavy, quant heavy subjects. I personally actually joined MIT for the opposite reason. I was attracted to MIT because before the MBA, I had to do this internal project for McKinsey on leadership. And I got to study like the cutting edge theories on leadership. And those cutting edge theories of leadership were coming from MIT. And these include, it's the opposite. It's like Peter Senge, the Fifth Discipline, he wrote a book like in the 80s, very long, but from there it started. And now there's Otto Scharmer working on Theory U, and there's all these new theories on leading from the emergence that include, more awareness, meditation, and tapping into the unknown. And this was what had actually attracted me to MIT. So I specialized on that. I took every single class I could do on leadership and on these topics. I asked both Peter and Otto to do their courses, their like private courses with them. And I think there's a very fascinating combination at MIT between like this like quant heavy physics, this is an engineering school, and the spiritual world that they combine beautifully together.
Yeah. Yeah, I think MIT is one of the few schools that is able to do that. And India, of course, has IITs, which are like Indian Institute of Technologies. And while they're good, they have produced a lot of great engineers and great tech companies. But it falls short of like being very integrative with other disciplines. Like, so people who get out of IITs, this is my like understanding of it, are great with numbers and theories and formulas and how to solve a technical problem. But when it comes to things beyond that, so like soft skills like negotiation or communication, they fall short on that because the course is so intensively designed to just help you understand problem solving in technical terms that your personality doesn't grow in other areas, which are important, of course, because when you work in an organization, you need to know how to negotiate, be it your salary or deadlines or the team dynamics, as well as to communicate that so that there is no misinformation or miscommunication happening. So it's that, and so often you see them struggling, and it's it's it feels bad because it's a wasted potential they could like. Now, I think now it has changed, and now people try to like make it more inclusive and more integrated. But yeah, I think MIT does that, and I've seen some of the courses that is there on MIT X, like the open courseware. And yeah, I think they try to quantify happiness, which was interesting for me. That okay, as you said, happiness, relationships. So yeah, I think it's great that you were able to balance both of those things, like spirituality and management. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So now your designation right now at Cybint Solutions is that you're a chief product officer, right? So what exactly
Yes.
does a chief product officer do?
Great question. So I'm in charge of developing all our products, which in this case are training solutions in cybersecurity, right? So there's two main product problems that we are solving. One is the reskilling. There's 4 million vacant positions in cybersecurity in the world because there's not enough people that have the basic skills to fill them. So we're trying to reskill people that are not in cyber into cyber. And at the same time, once you get into cyber, you still need to learn all the time because there's new threats all the time. The bad guys keep coming up with new ways of attacking. So you need to keep up to speed all the time. So we also have an upskilling solution for the corporate world for the people that are already there. So what my team does is understand these problems better, go talk to the people that are willing to reskill, or corporations that need to upskill their students. And as I mentioned before, first very 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 focused on the problem. What is the problem that we're trying to solve? So we understand their needs very well, we talk to the customer, then we develop the solution, then we put it out there, get feedback, improve it. And like this, we continue developing new solutions that hopefully can help people all around the world get into cyber and grow in cyber. That will help us all because cybercrime just keeps growing. And so it's a way to help people stay safe. And I'm very inspired by that. I got into cyber by accident, kind of, and now I'm a huge fan.
Awesome. Yeah, I think, well, cybersecurity has, gained so much prominence and recognition in like last decade or so because, with more social media platforms, with more privacy concerns, has also been like, the growth in the number of cyber threats. And privacy has become this hot debate because, well, companies want as much information as they can from you, but you also want your data to be safe. And so that sort of like cybersecurity experts can be the bridge between these two conflicting priorities, that okay, they can design products or solutions that could cater to both the advertisers or people who want to serve you better ads and stuff like that, if you opt for it, that is. And then you also could be uh, rest assured that your data won't be exploited, or it will be encrypted, so that there is no risk of it being hacked or it being misused. uh, I have some history with software engineering, not really cybersecurity. And so, well, growing up in India, it's kind of hard to escape IT, because, well, if you are not an engineer, you are doing some form of engineering. And my dad really sort of like pushed me to pursue that. They're like, okay, well, you can do something better on a computer than just playing games, so might as well learn to code something. So
Or you should be doing some kind of engineering.
yeah, so my dad is like, okay, if you don't want to do mechanical engineering or like some other sort of engineering, at least you can do computer engineering, right? Like, computers, so it won't be that hard, and stuff like that. So yeah, I have a diploma in software engineering, and it was essentially, I think so much has changed since I got my certification, because at that time we used to program in C sharp and C++, C, and like Java and SQL Server and all of that. Of course, now there is like, for even for finance, people are moving towards Oracle, and they're moving towards R, the programming language, or Python. So it's like, yeah, I still have a lot to catch up on that. But yeah, I think, cybersecurity solutions. I actually gave a guest lecture at my undergrad institution, speaking about the biggest challenge that fintech will have in future, especially with the AI engines coming in, will be cybersecurity. And I showed them a clip from this TV show called Mr. Robot. Have you seen that show?
No, I've heard about it.
It's yeah, so it's a pretty cool show about like this group of underground hackers that are trying to overthrow a corporation, because they have like a dark history, like a dark past, you know. So it's that. Uh, it's a pretty cool show. I think you should check it out. That convinced me that anything could be hacked, because they do actually end up hacking everything, from your cars to your computers to your smart homes. So it's that. But yeah, I think it's great. So what I'm getting, like what I can understand, is that a chief product officer is like, you manage a lot of product managers under you. Is that it?
I do. I have product managers. I have instructional designers, trainers, because because it's an education company. So there's more than just the product management. And so we have the instructional designers that are the ones that talk to what we call the subject matter experts, that are the people that actually know about this. But experts may or may not be good at explaining what they're doing, because they do it naturally. They don't realize, like, oh, actually, I know that I need to do this because I did this before, right? So the instructional designer is the
Yeah,
one that digests the knowledge from the expert and puts it into a way, in our case is online learning, like puts it into a way, interactive, engaging, and digestible way that students can absorb it.
that's great. Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. I have a friend who is a product manager at IBM, and so she talks about, like, how she works with vendors and, like, fulfills their organizational requirements through IBM products. So yeah, I think now I have a much better idea. So that's great. Uh,
Yeah, we also work, with the commercial and marketing part of the company, helps us understand what are the needs of the customers, and then the tech part of the company help us problem solve and build the right solution. So it's very interesting because you get to work with everybody.
yeah, yeah, that's great. So since we are on the topic of technology and cybersecurity, now we are getting towards a point in time for humanity where more and more products, like more and more tech products or devices, are integrated with human biology. So the Apple Watch can, or like the smart watches can read your heartbeat. they can measure your blood oxygen level. And in some, like, not like European countries like Denmark and Sweden, people are actually microchipping the RFID chips, so that jobs like just accessing a door or getting an entry into a company is easier. You don't need an ID or a badge or anything. It just scans your arm and the door opens. So how do you think that, I mean, like, of course these are also devices that have software as well as hardware component, so they could be hacked, right? So I mean, cars, if you have seen Fast and Furious movies, you know how cars are hacked and all of those things. So the thing is that now we are integrating technology with biology. How like, will the future look like? What kind of risks it could pose, or like how could cybersecurity be like a way that those risks are mitigated? As you said, new risks keep coming up every day, so we don't want somebody to, like, hack your RFID chip, uh, and lead to some crazy outcome.
Yeah. So in general, personally, I'm a little scared about this. I'm not a big fan of like over like computerizing ourselves. But I see that there's so much you can fight, and it does make us a lot more vulnerable on the cybersecurity side, right? Like if all your physical activity is recorded, if you have like, I don't know, a bypass in your heart that's connected to the internet, that can get hacked. If you have a device that's measuring your blood sugar, it's great because suddenly you don't need to start like pinching yourself, but that also can be hacked. So it does put us in a more vulnerable position. And I think we just need to be more careful. Like I always say that when you travel to Latin America, it's a less safe place. There's more crime. Like, there's more crime. But you can be safe if you just know about it and you know what things to do. So, for example, we don't talk on the phone in the street. We do not use ATMs that are in the street. We only use ATMs that are inside. There's small things, or you don't leave your purse in the table while you're distracted doing something. So when people from very safe countries, say Singapore, Japan, or even the US, come, if nobody tells them that they need to behave differently, they're going to be victims of crime. And I feel
Yeah.
that with cybersecurity, it's kind of the same. There's some very basic things that you need to know that can radically change your level of exposure. So the cyber awareness at this point is really important. And for example, personally, since I started working here and understanding what this is about, I started doing cybersecurity kindergartens for I have a big community of people like around above 60, and they are the ones that are most at risk because they don't understand
Yeah.
technology. They are afraid of technology, and so they are really at risk. So understanding the very, very basic things that they should do in order to stay safe can make a big difference for them. So I think that as we continue including computerized devices in our bodies, we need to be responsible and do our homework and learn how to use them safely.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love the analogy that you drew between, like, traveling to a country or a region that is less safe, and, drawing that parallel with technology. And yeah, you're right. Like, older population is at a much higher risk. And, I was having this conversation with my sister that how when I was a kid, and my sister, she's younger than me, when we were kids, my parents used to tell me that, hey, do not talk to strangers, and don't just become friends with anybody, like, take some time to get to know them. And so, it's not like you end up in some crazy situation. And now the whole dynamic has reversed, because I and my sister say the same to my parents, like, okay, don't just become friends with anybody on Facebook, because you don't know who really is on the other end. So don't just share your number with anybody or any other information, like don't send them pictures and everything. So it's that. So I understand the technology has, evolved, and so it has all these risks. But yeah, I think, as long as there are certain protective measures that people take, will be fine. There will be a way to safely move forward while having all these things implemented. I thought of an idea of a movie that, in some future year, like 2075 or something, there's this separation in society of people who are chipped and completely connected to the grid, and then there's this resistance where like nobody's chipped, so they cannot be tracked. And then it's sort of this civil war that happens between them, and they both are trying to eliminate each other because they feel their point of view is correct. And so it's this sort of this tension that, people have difference in opinion. And of course it's an imaginative scenario, but it's good entertainment where, like, you can do a social commentary on how people think in terms of technology. And it's like a Black Mirror episode, like a Black Mirror film. So that would be interesting if we can get it made.
Very interesting exercise. Yes.
Right, yeah. Awesome. Okay. Uh, so now, of course, when it comes to tech, uh, you know, uh, females need more representation. They need higher visibility. So, according to you, what do you think organizations can do to promote higher female representation in their organization and in industry in general?
Yeah, I think it's a big problem that it starts in different places. Like, for example, when I studied economics, we were 7 women and 25 men, right? So by definition, there's less female economists in the industry, and the same kind of happened with tech. So I think it starts from younger situations where we encourage women to go into these fields too. But I think there's a lot we can do. Like, for example, this was a practice that I remember McKinsey had to make sure that every woman got interviewed by at least one woman. And I see it now. I'm hiring a lot. I'm interviewing a lot of people, and I see how sometimes women say things that you have to make an effort to stay with it. It's like sometimes it's like, okay, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I remember once I got this answer, it's like, well, in 5 years, I hope to be having a small project. And I was like, I stopped the interview. I was like, why small? Like, I'm not going to hold you accountable in 5 years. Like, this is the moment when you get to dream. Why are you dreaming small? So I think that be more supportive during the interview, make them feel more comfortable, and also, kind of detecting the imposter that comes in them too. It's important. And then once in the company, you have to have like a supportive environment. It's not easy. When I joined Cybint, I was the only woman in Israel. And well, I'm used to it. It's not the best feeling. So it's important to bring those, as you bring more, it's easier afterwards. And I think having an environment where you support each other and you help us, like, again, work through, because when you see that everybody else looks different, it's difficult to feel that you belong there. So I think that having your allies in the company, or having a community, even if it's not at your company, it's a community of other people working in the same field, can be really helpful.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I think, that's such a great idea, that if you have more role models to look up to, your journey becomes that much easier, because then you have this multiple reference points for how, this person did it despite their setbacks or shortcomings or discrimination or whatever other odds that were thrown at them. And I think so, organizations like Girls Who Code and, a lot of universities highlight women in tech and engineering, which is great, because having like a separate club or an organization that focuses solely on that and amplifies those voices makes a lot of difference. It goes a long way. And I think, yeah, I think, the organizations that do it, it's awesome. But I feel the more efforts and more energy need to be channeled into this area so that women can also feel empowered about, taking up jobs in, industries that are perceived to be male dominated, such as like, being a scientist or astrophysicist and things like that. uh, Things that are highly analytical in that regard. So the traditional mindset is that, okay, guys do those things and like women do like, non complicated stuff. But of course, that's not a ideal way to move forward. And so, yeah, I think having your allies, as you said, is a great way to move forward. And in my company, I try to. This is what I decided, that at every at any point in time there will at least be 1-to-1 ratio of male to female in the company. Only if it gets like too skewed in the favor of either gender is when we will sort of take conscious effort to um, balance that. But then as we went through that process, we felt like, okay, we don't want to enforce a particular ratio just at the cost of you know saying that, okay, we maintain this gender ratio. It's ultimately about like having people in the company that make a difference and have an impact. So yeah, right, it just so turns out that we always end up having more females than males. Um, and so I'm glad that I've been able to offer that environment to a lot of women from minorities, or that gender representation. And it's just turns out to be naturally that way. I don't go out of my way to hire more females only or more males only. It's just that based on whoever applies, that just ends up being female heavy, so we just work off of that.
Now we're almost at 50% here at Cybint, and I definitely think that it's about diversity. It's not about majority, and I think what's important, and I see this at the MIT bootcamps too. What's really important is to have a diverse team. So whenever it's like, okay, this department tends to be only men, like let's diversify, or only women, let's diversify. Like there's a lot more creativity when we are different, and diversity can also come in other ways. It can come in age, it can come in nationality, it can come in sexual orientation, gender. So I think that that's what's really important, not to be all the same.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very well said, and I completely agree with that. Right. Okay. So last three questions. We are almost done. So what are your views on artificial intelligence? There's one group of section that feels that AI will simplify so many things. Like you will have self-driving cars. It will take humanity into like a new level of technological advancement. And then there's other group of skeptics that say that, oh, it will become self-conscious and it will start a war and that will be the end of humanity. And both groups have compelling evidence to back their ideas. Uh, so where do you lie on that spectrum? Do you feel it's a force for good? Do you think that we are all doomed? Like what do you see with AI?
I It's a great question, an easy one. um, I think, as everything, it depends on how we use it. I don't think artificial intelligence by itself has like value or not value, but it depends on how we use it. Personally, I see, like, where I see it a lot I don't think it's going to take over humanity necessarily. But I also see that it's used as an excuse sometimes. Like, for example, in the MIT boot camps, it's like, yeah, we have this problem, and then we have an app with artificial intelligence, and it solves it. And it's not like that. It's not magic. It's expensive. You need to train it. It's not like, yeah, just artificial intelligence that's magic and solves all our problems. So I think we just need to be a little more, you know aware of how we talk about it and how we use it. And hopefully there will be good people making these decisions.
Yeah, yeah. Let's hope so. Yeah, because I mean, I understand that. Okay, like the way people were skeptical about the internet in the beginning. That okay, what if you know, like terrorist organizations get nuclear launch codes? They could start like that could be hacked, and you could you know end up in a lot of trouble. But of course, the people who designed those security systems knew the importance or the gravity of that situation, so they had like a higher level of encryption, which is very difficult to pass through, and so they have multiple layers, so you cannot just hack that system. Similarly, I feel like if there is a way to make sure that this thing, like AI does not get out of control, then we'll be fine. But of course, as is the case with any kind of technological revolution, people use it for good as well as for bad. So we just have to hope that okay, good guys are ahead of bad guys, so that we don't end up in that Skynet scenario from Terminator. Because then rich people will be fine, they already have bunkers and all of like that stuff. We'll be in trouble. That's right. So I think that's a very rational view on artificial intelligence.
So do your homework and learn how to use your devices and your artificial intelligence responsibly so you don't get hacked.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. That's how it should be. Okay. So last couple of questions. What kind of impact would you like to see your work have on people?
Um, Personally, right now, I would love to, because what I'm doing at Cybint, I would love to see millions of people that are not working or that are about to lose their jobs because of technology be reskilled into cybersecurity and get new jobs and new exciting careers. Because I've been in education for a while, for me, it's about bringing the best in people. And I try to live a very authentic life where I am very conscious of where I am. And I made a lot of, radical decisions that people say, oh, how courageous you are. And wow, how did you do that? And for me, it was just the obvious next step. It was not about courage. It was like, I just need to do this. And I try to have relationships that are very true and very honest, where I can actually have all the difficult conversations that we need in order to grow. So I would love to know that the people I work with also can, grow into these more authentic lives themselves. And hopefully we can all, the people I work with and our students and the people around me can actually step into their potential and grow into what they can actually become if they trust themselves.
Right. Yeah. I think that's very beautifully put together, because as much as I know about Israel, it's that they have this distinct advantage of having the military grade encryption system and cybersecurity systems that are then like given to the enterprises. And so I think I watched a Vice documentary about how the military makes their high level security systems, or like a version of those high level security systems, available for the enterprises and organizations that they can use to protect their data. And I think that's really remarkable, because every advancement in cybersecurity solutions can then be passed down to companies and other organizations, and so that makes it a very strong ecosystem. And what impact that would have, as you said, on the education side, is that the highest level of skills that you could acquire in a particular field are very easily available, which means you can then use that skills to gain employment within the country or other parts of the world. And as you said, that cybersecurity is an ever evolving field. So people who choose to become a part of it, they'll always have, new challenges to encounter. So in that sense, it will have a very profound effect, not only on the industry, but like, ensuring that everybody stays safe. And people like you sort of are at the front of it and leading the ideas into the new generation.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily about this like high-end military encryption cyber. Like that's really important too. But there's basic cyber, I would call it sometimes cyber hygiene, like the same way that every business has a security guard in the door. Like you have to have someone watching your cybersecurity, right? And this happens all around the world. And so as we grow and we get more connected, there will be more and more need of this. So we need to make sure that small businesses can also hire these resources and have their own cyber guard taking care of them.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so it's sort of like the democratization of, this idea of cybersecurity and making it accessible. Uh, and yeah, I mean, doesn't it helps to have it on a higher level than most other countries. Uh, Now, final question. What are some of the exciting ideas or projects that you're currently working on, and what can the viewers expect from you going ahead?
So professionally, I'm working on this how do we reskill people that are losing their jobs, are getting obsolete into cybersecurity, and I think this is a very exciting time. And as you mentioned, cyber here in Israel is something very common, and it's like you know what in India, your father wanted you to be an engineer. Here, your father would want you to be a cyber expert. But abroad, it's not like that. People are still not really conscious of the importance of cybersecurity. So this is a big project that I really hope that we get to help the world, you know, really embrace this and stay safer. On a personal note, I started climbing and I'm very excited about this whole new world of climbing. And yeah, so I'm excited about that project of mine.
That's great. Does Tel Aviv have a lot of hiking sites nearby?
Yes. Um, so in Israel, we always think that things are far away, but they're not. Like everything. It's a tiny country, so there's a lot of hiking paths and climbing places and all kinds of nature of different types that you can do around here.
Right. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Quick question. What do you
Yes.
do, beyond work, like to relax and to sort of take your mind off of, things? So you mentioned you go hiking, but has there been anything else that you've been doing?
Yeah. So I'm climbing, not only hiking, just climbing in walls too.
Yeah.
I Now I live one block away from the beach, so that's amazing. I love watching the sunsets in the beach. Uh, as I mentioned, I have a solid meditation practice that I really enjoy. And I like to hang out with family and friends, which has been more difficult during Corona times and being an immigrant here. But I have an amazing community, so I like to hang out with them.
That's great. Thank you so much for your time, Ingrid, your
Thank you.
insights and your inputs. And this discussion has been very enlightening for me, as I'm sure as it would be for the listeners. So, thank you so much for sharing your life journey and setting an example for both men and women that you could have all this diversity of experiences, and it's okay to lose your way along the way and have insecurities, but if you want to grow and if you are focused, then you will eventually find a way. So I think your career is a reflection of that, and it has certainly made me intrigued about learning more about cybersecurity and not just understanding it from a media perspective or a content perspective, from shows like Mr. Robot. So yeah, I certainly will be doing some more homework on that, and who knows, that might make for some more technical discussion in like your future appearances on the show. So that would be exciting. So yeah,
Yes.
thank you so much for your time and your ideas and your inputs, and I'm really glad we could have you on the show.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. It was a real pleasure talking to you. And yeah, I wish you the best. And for all your listeners, just really follow your heart and do what you need to do. You'll get there.